Welcome to the Red House RoundTable, where today we'll be discussing Rights in the Balance, States of Emergency. This is a youth parliamentary network discussion in collaboration with the Office of the Parliament. I'm your host, Khaleem, a former national youth parliamentarian and an attorney at law, and I'm joined with three spectacular young people in the room today. With me, I have Miss Renee Atwell, who is also a former national youth parliamentarian in the Yes to Leadership program and a criminal defense attorney. I have Miss Alexandra Ghany, who is a legal research officer at the Office of the Parliament and a former national youth parliamentarian. And then last but not least, Luke James Trim, who is a CARICOM youth ambassador and a former youth parliamentarian as well. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Are you excited?
Very much.
So, we're here to discuss the concept of a state of emergency. For those of you who may not know, Trinidad and Tobago is currently under a state of emergency, which was initially declared on the 30th of December 2024 by Her Excellency the President. And on Monday, the 13th of January 2025, that state of emergency was extended for 3 months by the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. So, let's delve into the conversation. What is a state of emergency? Alex?
Right. So a state of emergency it describes a situation where either a calamity has happened, such as an earthquake, a flood, any sort of natural disaster, or the outbreak of an infectious disease, as we would all be quite familiar with. It can be where, as in this case, action has been threatened, action has been done, which threatens public safety, which is why we're currently under a state of emergency. And under these circumstances, the president is allowed to declare a period where rights are suspended of the average citizen, and they're able to make regulations that ordinarily would not be constitutional. States of emergency is actually not a novel thing. It is inherited from the Roman Empire. It was not called a state of emergency at that point. It was actually called a dictatorship. I know there's a certain stigma with the word dictator, but it took on a different meaning at that time. At that point, Rome was often in a state of war, so they would declare a dictator for a period of 6 months who would be able to take action and make decisions that usually would be reserved for the Senate of Rome to make those decisions. And like I said, it's very similar in that it's a period that lasts no longer than 6 months, where you can make decisions, and the point of it is to not only make decisions that are not in conformity with the preservation of our constitutional rights, but can be made quickly. Like the word emergency connotes, it is usually only done in times of crisis.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. That lovely overview and taking us back all the way to the Roman Empire, where states of emergencies find their origin. So just to provide, I guess, our listener with some context, a state of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago is governed by Part 3 of the Constitution, specifically Sections 7 through Sections 11 of our Constitution. And a state of emergency is declared by the person who holds the office of the president. It is initially declared by proclamation for a period of 15 days. Before the expiration of that 15 days, the Parliament, specifically the House of Representatives, has to decide through a debate whether or not they want to extend the state of emergency for a period of up to 3 months with a simple majority. That means 21 members of the current 41 members of the House of Representatives must vote in favor for it, as was done on the 13th of January 2025. And then there's also the opportunity for Parliament to again reconvene to decide if to extend in additional periods once they don't exceed a total period of 6 months in aggregate. If they do exceed a period of 6 months in aggregate, then we have the Senate stepping in as well. And then both houses of Parliament, by a special majority of 3/5, have to decide to extend the state of emergency. So that's just a little overview. Of course, during a state of emergency, as many people will have probably seen, the president also issues regulations, and those regulations govern the conduct of citizens. It provides certain powers to public officials, to police officers, to the defense force. And we're going to get in touch. We're going to get more in depth during the conversation on those specific things and the way in which it relates to you as an individual or you as a young person specifically. So now let's shift the conversation a little bit, and I'm going to pass you over now to the attorney in the room, well, one of the attorneys in the room, I should say, Renee Atwell, who is going to talk about, the implications of a state of emergency for the average citizen and for young people. So, Renee?
Thanks so much, Khaleem. So, when we are speaking about a state of emergency, one of the things that we speak about is a suspension or limitation of the fundamental rights and freedoms that we have in the Constitution. So generally, we have certain rights, of course, right to respect for private and family life, freedom of movement, etc. And when there is the declaration of a state of emergency, what it does is it allows for a limitation of those rights. And this can manifest itself, for example, through what we call a curfew, which is a limitation of the freedom of movement. Or even, for example, where police have powers to search premises without a search warrant, where otherwise they would require such to enter into someone's personal premises. And so these are some of the typical ways that you see a state of emergency can affect the everyday life of a person who lives in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, zooming in, of course, to youth and that stakeholder group that we are speaking about today, there are various ways in which states of emergencies can affect young people. Of course, we can first look at the psychological effects. Even though we don't have, for example, a curfew in place right now, just the very anxiety and fear associated with, one, an increase in crime, but also seeing increased police and military presence within communities can affect young people and even children, creating a sense of paranoia, a sense of fear associated with this current state of emergency. Otherwise, for example, it can affect youth involvement in different extracurricular activities due to, of course, the need for increased safety. While there is no curfew, as I said before, there is a need, of course, for young people and people living within communities, especially those where there are increased military presence, to be mindful of the way that they move and they interact, especially because we know in Trinidad and Tobago there has been and continues to be rather increased gang warfare between communities and even within communities as well. And so those are some of the ways in which the SOE can affect the country at large, but also zooming into youth and young people particularly.
Okay. Thank you so much for that overview, Renee. I think the interesting thing that you would have pointed out definitely would be that a state of emergency has the potential to create a state of panic amongst persons, and of course just generally create a sense of unease in the country. Yes. We have, as we're familiar with, and persons may not be familiar with, police presently have enhanced powers to search, to seize, to arrest, and even detain people where necessary. And that goes back to the justification or the nature of this current state of emergency, which really is based on national security, a threat to national security, and the need to take decisive action without being caught up in the legal process to really try to curb current crime. Because, as you mentioned, there's currently an increase or surge in rise in gang violence and gang-related murders. And then, of course, the government officials at the point in time would have also mentioned that the decision to declare the state of emergency was based on intelligence, credible intelligence, that there were going to be reprisal killings amongst gangs. So, of course, there was a need for the state to step in and intervene with an aim towards protecting public safety, public life. And that brings me to the 30th of December 2024. I remember at 8 a.m. in the morning, I was just scrolling through social media on my phone, and then I see a press release that Her Excellency has declared a state of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago on the justification of national security. And I remember, just like being in that moment and recognizing for myself, so this is how I find out that we're under state of emergency. And so, we have somebody in the room who's no stranger to communication, who's no stranger to the media. And so, Luke, I would like to get your perspective on the manner in which the state of emergency was declared and how it perhaps affects public awareness and public perception of what is currently taking place.
Okay, sure, Khaleem. So, December 30th is usually a period where us as citizens, the only thing we're worrying about is, I probably spent out my money for the whole month. How am I going to survive in January? For us as young people, we are focused on making vision boards and setting goals. So imagine you wake up one morning, 8 in the morning, something resembling a press release comes out saying that we are under a state of emergency. We also need to recognize that the last time this country was under a state of emergency, what people know is that we have no freedom. We are accustomed to curfews. And when you read the press release, Khaleem, it was very vague. It was like, is this even real? So as a journalist, as a TV host, the first thing I need to do is fact check. I went over to the office of the Prime Minister's page. Nothing was posted. So it brought a lot of questions, one. It brought a lot of panic, two. And it made me question, is this state of emergency really warranted? Or is it because we live in a country where crime is always a hot topic? It felt as though, okay, everybody's speaking about crime here, take this. That is how it felt. Because if you really care about us as citizens and how we will perceive a situation, why is it that we are being subjected to this sort of paranoia and this sort of anxiety? So, Khaleem, I think that as a young person, especially when we have to think about our older generation, they don't have access to social media like we do. So, for the average senior citizen who lives in the community, they will now have to depend on hearsay. And I think we all know how that can go, especially in the height of a political season, Khaleem. It is very important for us as young people now that we need to lead the charge to really address the misinformation in this space. We have bodies such as law societies, we have youth organizations that can come together and really tell young people this is what a state of emergency is, this is what is happening, and this is how we can, navigate through it. We recognize, Khaleem, that we all can't be perfect. Everything cannot be perfect, but that's why we are here as young people, to be the change that we want to see in this country, in our communities, in our spaces. Furthermore, Khaleem, I think from a media perspective, we need to be careful. Very careful, especially in this tech area where people can oftentimes use that information for the wrong purposes. And we need to also understand that we have regional people who are looking in. We have regional people who ask questions. I remember that when I got so many messages from my friends who are studying at UWI, right here in St. Augustine. Look, does this mean I can come back to school? Like, what does this mean for us as regional people? Why is it that Trinidad and Tobago is under a state of emergency in the first place? And furthermore, why was it announced so abrupt? So, Khaleem, I think these are some questions that we really need to be answered. And in the event that there's another state of emergency, is it going to be just like that again, Khaleem?
If you're listening now, we are currently in the Red House RoundTable, which is a podcast by the Office of the Parliament. And of course, we encourage you to visit our website at ttparliament.org and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, X, and Instagram. We're currently having the discussion on rights in the balance, states of emergencies.
Right, so thank you, Luke, so much for that, great recap of the importance of media, the importance of a proper communication strategy to ensure that people understand, one, what is happening, two, how it affects them, and then three, like you said, in an age of misinformation, being able to decipher what is and isn't real, because we all know, we tend to, first response, human instinct is to panic. And so when you see something, like you said, that's vague, you're just going to panic. You're going to panic buy. You're going to probably engage in conversation that deviates from that which was originally captured in the press release. And then that's just going to further build and build and build on panic. And I think an important thing that you mentioned was the way in which it was perceived by persons outside of Trinidad and Tobago as well. I think this was one of those states of emergencies in our past where I remember I saw like BBC and NBC, other international media organizations now also discussing the fact that Trinidad and Tobago was placed under a state of emergency. And even in that reporting, some sort of, misinformation because of the way in which it was announced to the nation. So as we continue the conversation, and we are at the halfway point and going towards the end of the conversation, it is definitely important for me to get your own individual perspectives. So as you would all know, and as I would have mentioned at the start, that states of emergencies have very limited or confined lifetimes. And so the justification being curbing crime, curbing violence, something that has been increasing rapidly and is almost out of control. What do you think One, do you think this is an effective manner or measure to control crime? And two, what do you think is going to happen after the period eventually does expire? So Renee, will start with you, and then we'll move to Alex and then Luke.
Okay, so I think one thing that we should always consider is, I think I could say this, that crime is perhaps one of the major issues that we do face in Trinidad and Tobago. However, it's very difficult as a young person to see that there is an active crime fighting strategy in Trinidad and Tobago. And I say that as a criminal defense attorney, somebody who works within the criminal justice system, where you are continuously seeing every year an increase in crime happening. And so we have to be very mindful of when we declare a state of emergency, what are we going to do over the next few months? And as I was listening to the debate, I think it was on Monday in Parliament, I heard one of the MPs say this, that a state of emergency without anything else will not make sense. And so it's very important for us to know that with a state of emergency, what are we going to do? Are we going to amp up our intelligence efforts? Are we going to increase support to TTPS, Defence Force? Are we going to engage our young people in different programs, especially those who live in these at-risk communities? And so SOE without anything else will not be very effective. We need to be able to do another and more effective crime fighting strategy to support the SOE that we currently have in place.
I think you have to look at not just the chaos and the process within the state of emergency. You have to take a view to states of emergency as a concept. In Machiavelli's treatise, where he wrote about states of emergencies in the Roman Republic, he said that there are two things that you need to have a successful state of emergency, and I think that they ring true even today. You need to have a public that values accountability, and you need to have a society where corruption is very limited and there are enough safeguards to mitigate any corruption that may take place. So, I mean, Luke was talking about it before and Renee touched on it as well. People, certain marginalized groups in our society, they are scared of being victimized. There are fears and there's echoes in the public discourse on whether or not persons are going to suffer police brutality as a result of the increased powers that members of the Defence Force and the police have as a result of this state of emergency. And those are valid concerns. I think that you need to question, okay, well, what safeguards are there in place to ensure that the limits of those extended powers are properly administered? Do we as a society take enough time to really scrutinize what's going on? Are we paying attention?
Okay, so any efforts to curb the crime rates, I will welcome it because it's something that is needed, it is warranted. But while we appreciate the why, we need to also focus on the how you go about doing this. This state of emergency is operating on the backdrop of, porous border system. They claim that they are going to target specific groups where guns and narcotics are concerned. But if you are to exercise those efforts at the same time, it's come like Khaleem, we are trying to catch water with a strainer. Water spilled on the floor, you're trying to form an ice block from that. So you are trying to target these guns and narcotics, and our borders are very, very fragile. What is the point then? Because when you're not acting from that type of intelligence or that type of seriousness where crime is concerned, it's very easy for the state of emergency to be perceived as just mere theatrics for political purposes. So I think, Khaleem, we really need to see some sort of enforcement, some serious enforcement to really have that comfort that, okay, crime is being addressed and it's being addressed the right way, and it's not just being addressed to probably curb the conversations where crime is concerned or the lack of effort towards crime.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke. And I think that brings us to the end of our roundtable discussion on the states of emergency, of course, balancing the rights. So I want to thank all three of you for your time, for your expert opinions. And I want to, throw a call out there to anybody who listened in to get involved with us, get engaged in the discussion. Check us out on ttparliament.org. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, X, and Instagram, and share your thoughts with the Office of the Parliament on the state of emergency. Thank you very much.